Desert Oracle Radio, the voice of the desert.
Night has fallen on the desert, straight into darkness. Although, to be perfectly honest, it's still daylight as I am making this episode for you. So if you hear all the joyful songbirds somewhere in the background, well, that's not a red, blue, black, silver sound effect. That's the real thing. One thing I've noticed in getting older is that the people who ritually and regularly consume news media, especially the relics of monolithic media, nightly cable news, daily New York Times, etc., well, they all seem to have brain worms, worms in the brain, eating up the gray matter, leaving little behind. These ritual consumers of media have conversations that are mostly about what's bad that they heard on the news and always have some either-or response to whatever issue from the two choices given. And by the luck of their own generational draw, they have a comfortable retirement, so they don't experience most of daily life for people of working age. Their entertainment is the collapse of the world they once knew. And they pick their sides based on what their favorite newsreader reads off the teleprompter on a video screen. Of course, it can all change in an instant, but the audience rarely notices. Most disturbingly, some of these news consumers are fans or stans of particular news personalities. Like somebody who was on PBS and died 10 years ago, that sort of thing. But also, what's her name on this or that cable channel? What a newsreader. I really like her. That's what my mother once said about a catatonic newsreader on that very slow-paced TV news show for seniors. I really like her. That's a sign of brainworms, I'm sorry to say. To even have personal thoughts about a TV newsreader, it's clinical evidence of parasitic brainworms. As crystal clear a brainworm situation as a millennial customer care representative working from home with 50 grand in credit card bills from buying all the vinyl copies of all the Taylor Swift reissues, despite not owning a turntable. And that's a true fact about most vinyl record sales today. Most vinyl record sales go to people who don't own turntables, but one day they'll have the space and some more credit. And that's what a life without meaning looks like. This is what a meaningless society looks like. Just waking up in the morning makes you complicit. Oh, and last week the iPhone company admitted that it somehow broke the clocks within millions of iPhones. So people's alarms did not go off. Many people surely lost jobs or got in various forms of bureaucratic trouble, missed their weekly video phone appointment, forgot to pick up the cat from the vet, whatever. Apple Computer managed to break the clock in the phone remotely. Really a Boeing moment for the evil little devices. We never needed a mark of the beast. We willingly carry it around and pay for the privilege. So it's no wonder the more thoughtful and or romantic and or brave college kids have looked at the absolute evil in the world, primarily funded and committed by their own country, and decided to stand up for something during that one brief moment in their life when they've maybe got the vim and vigor necessary to put up a fight. At least once, this one time. Before being beaten back down and receiving their re-education and returning with glassy eyes and shattered nerves to their rotting society with its collapsing bridges and starving people and 600,000 homeless crowding the streets. As everything heats up a little more every year, and even the boomers are losing their homeowners insurance and even their spacious homes to the constant climate disasters, where a drooling corpse propped up at a podium can, on a whim, in final furious burst of senile insanity, either start World War III or release selected thousands of adults from lifelong debt bondage, or conversely, make entire graduating classes personas non grata, unable to get jobs or even the citizen's identification number, unable to qualify for the housing vouchers, unable to line up for rations at the USDA food bank every second Thursday. Well, you can't make a brainworm omelet without cracking a few skulls, as they say in the violence training program at all our Pentagon-funded local police departments. Speaking of state violence against peace activists, last year I recorded a podcast with a couple of guys and then I forgot all about it. And then this week, they posted the episode. We discuss the Gospel of Mark, specifically Mark chapter 8. The show is called, where is it? Bible Friends, apparently. And I've always been a friend of the Bible, because it's a classic book from antiquity, and especially in the King James translation, is a treasury of the English language. And unfortunately, it's one of the few works that has survived from antiquity because the imperial theocracy that assembled the Holy Bible also made sure to destroy almost all evidence of other books, of other art, of poetry, of anything that celebrated the beauty and wonder of life on earth. The only life we'll ever know. The only home we'll ever know. It was in the year 313 that the evil Constantine signed the Edict of Milan, making the monotheistic cult of the Christians the favored state religion in the vast empire he ruled as dictator for life. As Hans Poulsonder wrote in The Emperor Constantine, the prevailing spirit of Constantine's government was one of conservatism. His conversion to and support of Christianity served an entirely conservative end, the preservation and continuation of the empire. Constantine did not even believe in the religion. His was a deathbed conversion, just in case.
Desert Oracle Radio.
Just in case that monotheistic prison he'd built represented something more than an easy way to crush his rivals, crush dissent and innovation. The Roman Empire did not die for lack of power, for lack of cruelty and might. It died because people quit believing in it. They only believed in death. The monotheistic cult that Constantine elevated to sole state religion created a population of gloomy morons who despised their own lives. who despised the beauty and pleasure and adventure of human existence, who despised joy and clung to fear and dread. Climate change, lead in the water, the collapse of human fertility, the daylight corruption, all of this contributed to that empire's supposedly impossible collapse. But it was the immersive evil of monotheism that drowned the elderly empire and its credulous, moronic masses, as Gibbon makes clear in his History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Published in the year of 1776, a missed opportunity for a real revolution. Although we are getting there. Anyway, here's a clip from the Bible Friends podcast, which you can hear in its entirety if you like by looking it up on your phone or visiting the Desert Oracle radio website. We will probably have a link to it on the radio page.
Well, we've gotten up to chapter 8 in our journey.
We're in a desert.
We're in a desert. We're out there. We've got a bunch of people gathered. And this has happened before in Mark that they don't have enough food. And somehow they managed to divide the loaves.
Yeah, I have some feelings about that as an editor.
Lay them on. You gonna cut that, or you think there's some power to the reputation?
I'm certainly not the first to say it. I mean, every movie version, they always combine those into one event.
Yeah.
And when I look at it, it seems to be, there must be some symbolic meaning to it. It's like, why would, and, also Jesus, sorry, Lord, but that explanation of the parable is terrible. Where he's saying, where it ends with, and because it's this number and this number. It's like, what?
Yeah.
I don't, let me tell you what part I'm talking about. It's 8:14, the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. I think I'm reading the New English translation here. Now, they had forgotten to take bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat, and Jesus ordered them, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. So they began to discuss with one another about having no bread. When he learned of this, Jesus said to them, why are you arguing about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Have your hearts been hardened? Though you have eyes, don't you see? And though you have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you pick up? 12. When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you pick up? They replied, 7. Then he said to them, do you still not understand? Do you guys understand that?
And does that mean nothing to you, Jesus says? And I kind of have to say, yeah, I'm not sure. Brett, you've probably looked into the scholarship here. What's going on?
The empire, which created the entire religion people know as Christianity, did its best to crush the troublesome parts of the Jesus movement. The entirety of Jesus' philosophy, I mean. Because Jesus of Galilee, known simply as Yeshua ben Yosef in his own time, was in rebellion against the empire. His entire ministry was a rebellion against the weak and corrupt Roman-era urban temple religion. He, like Abraham and Moses and David before him, conducted his religious work outside in the natural places charged with old magic. Rivers and seashores, desert wilderness, rugged mountaintops. And when death was at hand, did Jesus return to that nest of vipers, the great urban temple that looked no different than an imperial cult temple in any other backwoods province? With its corrupt priests and politicians and the soldiers loitering around everywhere looking for some heads to crack? Of course not. He went to the ancient sacred grove upon the Mount of Olives. And there in the night he spoke directly to his God, the All-Father. Abba, as Jesus called the greatest of the regional gods. The personal form of father, papa, dad. Everybody called their greatest gods by those ancient names, Mother and Father. Although Constantine and his successors followed the lead of his rabidly insane mother Helena, especially in destroying the old places of outdoor worship, the high places throughout Palestine, just as the old European holy groves were cut down from the time of Caesar to Charlemagne, it turns out that this imperial dictatorship with its slave religion control system could not make every piece of the great ancient ages disappear. There were too many copies of the great works, Homer and Herodotus, Aristotle and Aesop. Remember that 97% of the great ancient works are lost to us, intentionally destroyed for the most part. Yet that tiny fraction of surviving texts was enough to fuel the great burst of scholarship, archaeology, anthropology, and art that overturned the old imperial church's stranglehold. The stranglehold on thought, on knowledge, on wisdom. And so, over time, it has been revealed that the urban temple form of imperial religious control was a fraud, something constructed by the Lord of Lies. Which is why, if you look at those cheap old houses' social media accounts, you'll see that entire churches are available for sale throughout the United States and much of the world. For sale and for peanuts. There are no gods in such places. Only the local spirits of sadness, of death, of cracked stucco, faded plastic siding, collapsed bell towers, broken windows, and Sunday schools with no children, no one left to lie to. Speaking of, there is a hot news story coming out of New Orleans. The Archdiocese of Orleans Parish is under criminal investigation for running a widespread, decades-long child sex trafficking ring. Anyway, I recently came across an old book called Folklore in the Old Testament, Volume 3, a lesser-known work by the pioneering Scottish anthropologist and folklorist Sir James George Fraser, who is rightly famed for his immense work of world mythology and folklore, The Golden Bough, published in various lengthy and condensed versions between 1890 and 1936. The great work that begins, of course, with the eternal legend of Diana of the Woods, Diana of the Sacred Grove, Diana of the Mirror Lake, Diana of the Yellow Moon. So let me read a little from this other work, Folklore in the Old Testament, Volume 3, because it's very much within our range of interest here at Desert Oracle Radio, about the life we once lived before the dark times, before the Empire. There was a special propriety in the employment of ravens to minister to the prophet in the wilderness. For the raven has often been regarded as a bird of omen and even as itself endowed with prophetic power. Thus, the Greeks esteemed the bird sacred to Apollo, the god of prophecy. And Greek augurs drew omens from its croaking. Moreover, persons who desired to gain the power of divination used to eat the hearts of ravens, believing that they thereby acquired the raven's prophetic soul. That's incorrect. Don't do that. Editor's note. The Romans thought that a raven stalking up and down on the sands and croaking was calling for rain. Also simplistic. Dumb. In some parts of Europe, the raven is still deemed ominous of death. The Indians of British Columbia imagine that he who has a raven for his guardian spirit possesses the gift of prophecy, and that he can especially foretell death and the weather. Indeed, the raven is the principal figure in the mythology current among the Indian tribes of northwestern America. The sagacity and solemn deportment of this sable bird may have had much to do with throwing a glamour of mystery and sanctity about it. According to an eminent authority, the raven is, quote, probably the most highly developed of all birds. Quick-sighted, sagacious, and bold. It must have followed the prehistoric fisher and hunter, and generally without molestation from them, to prey on the refuse of their spoils, just as it now waits, with the same intent, on the movements of their successors. While it must have likewise attended the earliest herdsmen, who could not have regarded it with equal indifference, since its now notorious character for attacking and putting to death a weakly animal was doubtless in those days too manifested. Yet the raven is no mere dependent upon man being always able to get a living for itself, and moreover a sentiment of veneration or superstition is from very remote ages and among many races of people attached to it. A sentiment so strong as often to overcome the feeling of distrust, not to say of hatred, which its deeds inspired, and though rapidly decreasing, even to survive in some places until the present time. Pliny the Elder tells a story which strikingly illustrates the veneration in which the raven was popularly held at Rome, when Rome was at the height of her glory. Under the reign of Tiberius, it happened that a pair of ravens had built their nest on the roof of the temple of Castor and Pollux. One of the young birds in time flew down, stalked into a shoemaker's shop, and took up its quarters there. The shoemaker not venturing to molest a creature which he looked upon with religious awe. Partly, perhaps, for its own sake, and partly for the sake of the holy place where it had been hatched. Every morning, the sagacious bird flew out of the shop, perched on the rostra in the forum, and there, in a distinct voice, saluted the emperor and his two sons, Drusus and Germanicus, by name, after which he greeted in an affable manner the people passing to their business. Having discharged these offices of civility, he returned to the shop. This he continued to do for many years, till at last another shoemaker in the neighborhood killed the bird, either out of spite, as was suspected, at the custom which the raven brought to his rival, or, as the shoemaker himself alleged, in a fit of passion because the bird had befouled the shoes in his shop. Whatever the motive, it was a bad day's work for him, for the people, thunderstruck at the death of their old favorite, rose in their wrath, drove the corbicidal shoemaker from his shop, and never rested till they had the miscreant's blood. As for the dead raven, it received a public funeral which was attended by thousands. The casket was supported on the shoulders of two Ethiopians. A flute player marched in front, discoursing solemn music, while wreaths of flowers of all sorts carried in the procession testified to the general respect and sorrow for the deceased. In this impressive manner, the funeral cortege made its way to the pyre which had been erected 2 miles out on the Appian Way. The historian concludes by remarking that the bird received a grander funeral than many a prince before him. Oh, and that Raven funeral story is so good, I never got to chapter 15, Sacred Oaks. For instance, it quotes W.M. Thompson's book, The Land and the Book, Lebanon, Damascus, and Beyond Jordan. Traveling in northern Palestine, Thompson remarks, these oaks under which we now sit are believed to be inhabited by jinn and other spirits. Almost every village in these wadis and on those mountains has one or more of such thick oaks, which are sacred from the same superstition. Many of them in the region are believed to be inhabited by certain spirits called Benat Yaakov, daughters of Jacob, a strange and obscure notion in regard to which I could never obtain an intelligible explanation. And we'll have to return to this. Return to lines such as scarcely any tree figures more largely in biblical narrative and poetry than the oak. In a village in northern Syria, there is a large and very old oak tree which is regarded as sacred. People burn incense to it and bring their offerings to it precisely in the same way as to some shrine. But there is no tomb of any saint in the neighborhood. The people worship the tree itself. From Amboy to Zizix and across the great Mojave wilderness, you've been listening to Desert Oracle Radio with some new soundscapes throughout this program by Red, Blue, Black, Silver. We're on the radio sometimes in Joshua Tree at 10. But you're listening to the podcast, and the radio is not going to get that for another week. Another cold front coming through. Very strong winds in the desert. Be careful or it might blow your wig off. Thank you for listening. And good night from the voice of the desert.